Each year, an average of 4 tropical cyclones make landfall on Australia's northern coastline. But the risk of cyclones moving south to New South Wales could be about to increase, and it's not because of climate change. Only 2 tropical cyclones have directly impacted New South Wales in the past 48 years. Cyclone Nancy in 1990 and ex-cyclone Oswald in 2013. They both brought significant flooding to the state's north and a damage bill in the hundreds of millions. However, going back further between 1945 and 1974, New South Wales was hit by 16 cyclones, including 8 just in the 1950s, when 2 systems even reached Sydney. This map shows the total cyclone tracks which impacted our state from 1887 to 2013, the majority occurring in that 30-year window last century. The inordinate frequency of cyclones during this period and the disappearance in recent decades is no random coincidence. A 2020 report in the Journal of Southern Hemisphere Earth Systems links New South Wales cyclone activity with changes in the Interdecadal Pacific Oscillation, or the IPO.
We can see that in previous negative phases of the IPO, there was also an increase in the number of tropical cyclones that impacted on New South Wales. The conditions were there in the oceans, in the atmosphere, that really kicked off a lot more tropical cyclones.
Before I explain exactly what the IPO is, a caveat. The phase of the IPO and other cyclone influences currently resemble the 1950s, meaning the current state of the Pacific is conducive to tropical cyclones returning to New South Wales. The IPO is a shift in Pacific Ocean temperatures, but unlike the annual La Nina and El Nino oscillations, the changes extend outside of the tropics and last from years to even decades. A negative phase of the IPO occurs when waters in Zone 2 along the equator are cooler than normal, while waters off Australia's east coast in Zone 3 and in the Northern Pacific in Zone 1 are warmer than normal. Here is a graph of the 11-year mean IPO. A negative phase was behind the flood-dominant 1950s to 1970s and a period when New South Wales tropical cyclones were frequent. A smaller cluster of cyclones also hit New South Wales in the early part of the 20th century, and again the IPO was negative. A positive phase led to the drought-dominant weather in Australia from the 1980s to 2000s. The lowest IPO values during the last century were in the early 50s, and 1950 was the wettest year on record for New South Wales. It was also a year when a tropical cyclone made it to Sydney. During the past few years, the IPO has plummeted, and the current value is the lowest in more than 100 years. Could this lead to a return of New South Wales cyclones?
If we were to enter a period similar to 45 to 75, we would have substantial damage and the costs associated with that if we went through that period again.
So what happens when a tropical cyclone reaches Sydney? Before cyclones were regularly named, a system in January 1950, labelled TC119, made landfall on the Gulf of Carpentaria coast, then tracked south and reached Sydney as a Category 1 system around 3 days later. Sydney recorded its second lowest pressure on record at 988 hectopascals and 114 millimetres of rain in 24 hours. 10 lives were lost and 7 yachts were wrecked in Sydney Harbour. This kicked off what became the wettest year on record before 2022 arrived. In February 1954, TC137 crossed the coast near Tweed Heads as a Category 3 cyclone with wind gusts in excess of 165 kilometres per hour. The cyclone was responsible for disastrous floods in Lismore and Casino. It destroyed houses and caused around 30 fatalities, the deadliest cyclone in New South Wales recorded history. This system caused the New South Wales all-time 24-hour rain record, 809 millimetres at Dorrigo, and dropped well over 100 millimetres right along the New South Wales coast, including Sydney. Could this summer be the year a cyclone returns to New South Wales? There is obviously no guarantee, especially considering the recent climate change-induced reduction in cyclone numbers around the world. But if the IPO remains strongly negative through several years, a major cyclone striking New South Wales would be far from unexpected. And with the population of the state now exceeding 8 million, the potential damage from a cyclone is higher than ever.